The 9th of April, 1940, Norway. German warships enter fjords, aircraft roar over cities, and soldiers move quickly to seize ports, roads, and government buildings. The invasion comes without a declaration of war and catches the country unprepared. Within hours, resistance is broken in many places. Occupation follows, bringing censorship, arrests, and the steady construction of a system based on control and exploitation. As the months pass, Norway is transformed into a military zone, its landscape reshaped by fortifications, roads, and camps built for the needs of Nazi Germany. To supply the labor for these projects, in the summer of 1942, thousands of foreign prisoners from occupied Europe are brought north. Among them are men from Yugoslavia, who are transported far from their homes and stripped of all protection. This system of occupation, forced labor, and dehumanization culminates in mass murder, when on the 18th of July, 1942, in the prison camp in the village of Beisfjord, 287 Yugoslav inmates will be killed, not in battle, but by order. However, this atrocity will not remain unpunished, and the perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their lives. Beisfjord camp was located in Narvik municipality in northern Norway and was part of a wide network of labor camps established across Norway after the German occupation in 1940. As the Second World War, which started on the 1st of September 1939, expanded and Germany prepared for a possible Allied invasion of Scandinavia, Norway became strategically vital. Its long coastline, closeness to the Atlantic, and access to iron ore routes from northern Sweden made it a key military zone. To fortify the country, the German authorities began large-scale construction projects. Roads, railways, coastal fortifications, airfields, and military installations were planned and built at great speed, often in some of the harshest terrain in Europe. To carry out this work, Nazi Germany relied on forced labor. Between 1941 and 1945, around 150,000 foreign prisoners of war, political prisoners, and forced laborers were sent to Norway. More than 13,000 of them died. The largest group were Soviet prisoners of war, followed by Poles and Yugoslavs. These men were treated as disposable tools, valued only for the work they could still perform. When they became sick, weak, or unable to work, they were usually killed. In the summer of 1942, large groups of Yugoslav prisoners began arriving in northern Norway. They were transferred from the Independent State of Croatia, a puppet fascist regime created by Nazi Germany and its allies after the destruction of Yugoslavia in April 1941. Many of the men sent north were Serbs. They were classified as political prisoners and transported under brutal conditions. By the time they reached Norway, many were already severely malnourished, ill, and traumatized. On the 24th of June 1942, 900 Yugoslav prisoners arrived at Fagernes Pier in the port city of Narvik. From there, they were ordered to march approximately 10 kilometers, roughly 6 miles, to Beisfjord, a small village south-southeast of the city. Guards struck them with rifle butts and shouted to keep them moving. Prisoners who stumbled were beaten again. 5 men died along the road from exhaustion and injuries, and 1 prisoner was shot and killed before the column even reached the final destination. At Beisfjord camp, conditions were catastrophic from the start. The barracks were overcrowded and filthy, and prisoners received starvation rations that could not sustain heavy physical labor. Clothing was inadequate for the cold and wet northern climate, and medical care was almost non-existent. Prisoners were beaten for minor acts such as moving too slowly, or simply for drawing attention to themselves. Violence was not random but systematic, used to enforce total submission. The guards at Beisfjord came from two main groups. German personnel belonged to the Ordnungspolizei, a uniformed police force that was controlled in the camp by the SS, the Nazi paramilitary units. Alongside them served Norwegian volunteers from the Hirdvaktbataljonen, a volunteer guard battalion within Hirden, the paramilitary organization of the Norwegian collaborationist movement, the National Samling. These Norwegian guards were responsible for guarding prison camps in northern Norway between June 1942 and April 1943. Survivors later testified that some of these guards displayed such extreme cruelty that even German officers complained that they went too far in the mistreating of the inmates. The situation in the Beisfjord camp soon became critical. Within weeks, disease spread rapidly through the facility. Prisoners were weakened by hunger and exhaustion, and lice thrived in the overcrowded barracks. Typhus appeared, a disease associated with such conditions. Instead of improving hygiene, providing food, or offering medical treatment, the camp authorities chose isolation and extermination. On the 12th of July 1942, German officers arrived at Beisfjord together with a German physician and a Norwegian doctor to inspect the situation in the camp. The inspection was brief because proper medical procedures were ignored. No blood tests or stool samples were taken, even though such tests were necessary to diagnose typhus. Instead, the Norwegian doctor selected prisoners simply by looking at them from a distance. During interrogation by the British War Crimes Commission in the autumn of 1945, the Norwegian doctor stated about the situation in the camp during his visit, "All the prisoners had lice and were indescribably emaciated. Most of them were in dirty and torn clothes and without shoes. They had sores and boils all over their bodies from bad food and lack of hygiene. The sick lay like herrings. They lay directly on the floor without any kind of medical help. There was medicine, but it was forbidden to use it on the Serbs. Every morning there were 15 to 20 new cases of isolation, and every morning about the same number died. The dead were taken outside and thrown into mass graves. These people had worked under absolutely indescribable circumstances." Men who appeared frail or weak were pointed out. 85 prisoners were chosen in this way and moved into 2 infirmary barracks surrounded by barbed wire. By that point, their fate had not yet been formally decided, but the moment of decision was drawing near. A few days later, Josef Terboven, the Reichskommissar for Norway, would order the massacre of the ill inmates. The official justification was the prevention of a typhus epidemic. In reality, the order followed the familiar Nazi logic that prisoners who could no longer work had no right to live. Their deaths were considered a practical solution. On the 15th of July, 1942, the camp was officially quarantined by the SS. Guards sealed off the area. Prisoners with various illnesses were concentrated into the infirmary barracks. Conditions there were horrific. Men lay packed together, many delirious with fever, others barely conscious. Food was almost non-existent, water was contaminated, and no real medical care was provided. Outside, preparations for mass murder continued without interruption. On the evening of the 17th of July, nearly all prisoners who were still regarded as healthy were assembled. 588 men were marched out of Beisfjord, escorted by nearly all of the Norwegian guards and several German superiors. They were told nothing about their destination. They did not know that they were being removed so that those left behind could be killed without witnesses. Their march led them on a roughly 50-kilometer, about 31-mile route toward Bjornfiel, a village high in the mountains near the Swedish border. The prisoners marched there were placed in a new camp, but when they came only the guards' barracks were finished, and the prisoners had to start building barracks for themselves if they wanted to sleep under the roof. The SS inspected the prisoners carefully and shot the sick on the spot, and soon they came up with a cynical, sporting idea. On the 22nd of July, 1942, 2 days after arrival at Bjornfiel, all the prisoners had to run around the camp 6 times. Those prisoners who were not able were shot and killed. Rounds of this kind were held at other times, resulting in deaths every time. After 5 weeks, 242 prisoners were dead. The last 43 sick inmates were shot during the return trip to Beisfjord, where only 346 prisoners came back on the 25th of August, 1942. For those marched away, suffering stretched over weeks. For those left at Beisfjord, however, it would last only hours, and none were meant to survive. On the morning of the 18th of July, 1942, the massacre at Beisfjord began. The prisoners who remained were ordered to dig mass graves. Many could barely hold their tools. Once the pits were ready, the men were lined up in groups of 20, and guards shot them one by one. Prisoners who collapsed before reaching the edge of the grave were killed where they lay. Others were killed inside the infirmary barracks. Those inmates who refused to leave the building or could not stand or walk were left inside. Guards poured petrol over the wooden buildings and set them on fire. As the building was set ablaze, some prisoners jumped from the windows in desperation. Those who escaped the fire were shot immediately. A machine gun positioned in a watchtower fired at anyone who tried to flee. Within hours, the barracks were reduced to smoking ruins filled with burnt bodies, and 287 men were murdered. The 2 youngest prisoners were 14 years old, the oldest 58. In this largest known massacre of prisoners on Norwegian soil, 17 Norwegian guards were present and played an active role in it. They did not intervene or attempt to stop the killings, but followed orders, and in many cases acted with brutality of their own. The massacre was carried out openly and systematically, with full participation of both German and Norwegian personnel. The Beisfjord massacre was part of a wider pattern of killings in Norwegian prison camps. 4,268 Yugoslav prisoners were held in Norway from June 1942 to 1945, and about 2,400 were killed or died of disease and malnutrition. Norwegian civilian institutions were also involved in the system of forced labor and mass killings. The Norwegian Public Roads Administration planned and supervised many of the road projects where prisoners were used as labor. Engineers reported that prisoners were starving and lacked clothing, and local populations described them as little more than skin and bones. After the war, however, most Norwegian officials denied responsibility or claimed ignorance. However, the main perpetrators did not escape justice. In 1946, around 20 SS guards connected to the camps at Beisfjord and Bjornfiel were arrested, extradited to Yugoslavia, and tried in Belgrade for war crimes committed against Yugoslav prisoners. All were convicted and sentenced to death, and executed for their crimes. Josef Terboven, the Reichskommissar, who had ordered the massacre at Beisfjord, chose suicide over capture and killed himself on the 8th of May, 1945. Those who perished at Beisfjord are not forgotten. Since 1949, a memorial at the site has commemorated the Yugoslav prisoners who, by a brutal twist of fate, were murdered far from their homes, serving as a lasting reminder of their suffering and of the crime committed there.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.